Hey class, good to be back with you. We are now in chapter number 3, Federalism, and I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking to you about what federalism is, and so that you can apply those ideas and principles to your discussion board. Again, in regards to your discussion board, make sure that you take the time to review the links to samples that I've provided. And there's a nice article about how to get most of your points on discussion boards, as well as take the time to look over the rubric that I use for grading your discussion boards. And that's going to help you get most of the points out of your assignment. And of course, if you ever have questions, please feel free to call me or to email me here at Carl Albert. My office number is 918-647-1454. Okay, so what is federalism? All right, chapter 2 was all about the passage of the Constitution. And as you read the chapter, you understand that there were people that were supportive of the ratification of the Constitution, and then there were people that did not support the ratification of the Constitution. Of course, I'm talking about the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. And those Anti-Federalists were very much against the ratification of the Constitution. Patrick Henry of Virginia said that he smelled a rat and wanted to know who authorized the delegates to that convention in Philadelphia to speak as we the people, as opposed to we the states. So there was lots of conflict, and one of the ideas that is so basic to our understanding of the Constitution is to understand that the framers, those early Americans, were very, 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 very almost paranoid about the idea of the federal government or the central government becoming tyrannical. And so there's some mechanisms that they included in the Constitution to help lessen the probability that the federal government would become tyrannical. One of those was the separation of powers within the branches or within the federal government, the three equal distinct branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches. They were very concerned that the federal government be able to check one another so that no one branch become tyrannical. But another one of the goals of the framers of the Constitution was to make sure that the federal government, that having a strong central government, did not eliminate the states as a governing body. Those early Americans saw the state or the smaller government as being the greatest protection against tyranny. They saw the state as being the government that would protect citizens' rights. And so they also created, not only did they create a system of checks and balances and division of power, but they created the idea of federalism. Okay, so federalism is based on the idea that, number one, we're going to preserve the states, and number two, there's going to be a national government that governs the people directly, and that they divided that sovereignty between federal and state governments in a system that is called federalism. All right, so as Americans, we live under both national and state governments. And there are powers that the federal government alone holds. There are powers that only state governments have. And then there are powers that both governments share. For instance, the national powers include the power to maintain a military, to declare war, to establish postal system, to set standards for weights and measures, and to protect copyrights and patents. State powers include the right to establish local governments, set up schools, regulate state commerce, make regulation for marriage, establish and regulate corporations. Then there are powers that both the national and state governments hold together, such as the power to collect taxes, to establish courts, to regulate interstate commerce, to regulate banks, to borrow money, to provide for the general welfare, and to protect um, and punish to protect the citizens and punish criminals. So the idea of federalism is going to fix the two big weaknesses that led to the failure of the Articles of Confederation. Number one was the inability to tax, and number two was the inability to regulate commerce between the states. So federalism and the sharing of powers is going to address those issues so that the federal government is not does not overwhelm states, and yet is strong enough to maintain a union. So when we're talking about in our discussion question is about the example of transgender bathrooms, and that this is only one area that we could discuss. So in the recent order that was issued by President Obama said that school districts that did not offer restrooms for transgenders, or I guess I should say, did not allow transgendered students to use the restroom of their choice, that those school districts risk losing federal funding for their schools. And so the question is that a legal or constitutional method for the president to use to force school districts, local school districts, into following federal education policy? How does federalism play? And how do we apply the Ninth Amendment? Where the Ninth Amendment basically says that all powers not given to the federal government nor restricted to the states are reserved for the states. So if the president or the federal government is regulating local education, is that constitutional? Where do we find in the Constitution Congress and the judicial branch and the executive branch's authority to regulate local school districts and to impose policies on them? So I want you to think about how our government operates, and I want you to address specifically the issue of transgenders, but you can expand your ideas. And again, please offer concrete examples. Use your textbook and other materials, other academic materials to prove your point. Don't simply just say, I read about this on page 37 in our textbook. Tell me what about that proves your point. You have to start with a conclusion. You have to start with an idea. What is your opinion about the president and his demand that school districts follow his executive order or suffer the loss of funds? Is that constitutional or unconstitutional? If it is, tell me why. If it's not, tell me why specifically. Make sure that you write in a very logical way. Your ideas, there should be a flow from the beginning of your post to the end. Your ideas, there should be a progression, an obvious progression and transition between thoughts. And then when you reply to your classmates, make sure that you're not just simply saying, yes, I agree, or no, I don't agree. reply in a way that encourages more conversation. If you have any questions, as always, make sure you contact me anytime you need me here at Carl Albert State College. Again, I'm glad you're in class. If there's anything I can do, just let me know. And I'll see you again next week.